A derived table is a really neat construct that we can use in T-SQL to carry out some real quick operations on relatively small sets of data. So let's answer first of all the question, what exactly is a derived table? A derived table is nothing more than a virtual table. This means a table that is created and maintained in memory, that is created and used only within the scope of a query. So we're going to create our derived table, we're going to load it with data as our query is running, and then when our query is over, our derived table simply is erased from memory. Now this is used in place of a physical table in a query. Now the virtual table or the derived table is created using a select statement, and then it's given an alias using the as clause. And so whatever name we give it after the as clause is where the data that is retrieved by the select statement is loaded into, and that looks and feels like a table to our query. Just like it says here, the table can then be used within the query. Now the table gets discarded as soon as the query completes. So anytime that we need to grab some data, group it, sum it, average it, count it, do some sort of finagling, that's a technical term there for you, with that data, and then store it for just a few minutes while we run some other aspect of a query against it. And you do this a lot when you're running reports and when you're feeding reports with data. But once we've done all that and our query completes, that derived table out there in memory simply is discarded. Now you can think of a derived table, if this helps you, as a temporary view. I don't think we've talked about views very much so far. We're going to touch on them a little bit later on. But when you see views, think back to derived tables, because with a view, we basically give a select query a name, and then every time we execute that name or treat that name as if it's a table, it executes the select command and it allows us to view the data, hence the name view. A derived table is just like a view, except that we don't actually create this thing beforehand. We just kind of do it on the fly and use it. Now, this is why I put derived tables in a separate video from the actual code examples, because I really want to talk to you about these advantages and disadvantages. One of the big advantages of a derived table is it's very easy to create and use this without requiring database administrator or DBA intervention. Now, in most, especially medium to large size companies, you have a database administrator who is responsible for the stability of the database, the integrity of the database, the data that's in there, the code that's running against it, and you cannot just go start creating stored procedures or views or whatever. You have to request them from a DBA. They may let you write them, but they're going to pick them apart for performance issues, for security issues, for operational issues, for style, for structure, for all kinds of things. And sometimes it can just take a while to get DBA's attention to the point that you can implement the functionality you want. Well, with a derived table, this is all done within the confines of your query, and so you can write the query and test it and so forth. Then when you hand it to a DBA or someone for inspection, it all happens at one step. So the biggest advantage of derived table is it gives you programmability, but it's kind of in your own backyard, and you can maintain it and build it all without having to get directly involved with your DBA. It also provides very fast, very easy data organization for more complex data needs. Again, a lot of times if you look in books online or if you go to a class, we do all these really neat, clean, simple little queries. And there's a good reason and a good purpose for that, is because if you can understand any kind of functionality in its simplicity and kind of get your head around it and understand what's happening, then you can really make that thing smoke and hum in more complex situations. And so derived tables are just that. When we pull things here in class, it looks very simple, but in the real world, you may be pulling 8, 10, 12, 15 table joins, grouping, summing, averaging, counting, doing all kinds of things to feed a report, and derived tables can be a very useful part of that. Now, what are some disadvantages of using derived tables? And whether we're talking about derived tables, table variables, common table expressions, temporary tables, anything, there's always a strength for that particular functionality and a weakness. So what are the weaknesses of derived tables? Well, the table is constructed every single time the query is run, which means that we're going to take that performance hit. So if you're creating a derived table that holds, 285,000 rows, you're going to take a pretty good performance hit every time that query is run. That data is not persisted anywhere. It has to be created, it has to be retrieved and loaded into the derived table first before it can be used. So as a result, we generally want to keep these things on the small side. Now, a derived table also does not utilize indexes, which means if I create a derived table with, 4,000 or 5,000 rows, 15,000 rows, and then I start querying that derived table, it's probably going to have to do a full table scan and look at every row because I can't create indexes that will give it hints based on ranges and save it any row searches. And so you'll end up with a lot of table scans on that derived table. And for that reason, for both of the above reasons, large derived tables can create some pretty serious performance issues for you. And on any of these various functionalities that you see anywhere in Transact SQL, you should always build your best solution and then go do performance testing on it to see what happens. If you will look around out there on the internet and all the various T-SQL and SQL programmer forums and DBA forums, you will see all kind of conversations and name calling and all sorts of things about people who love table variables as opposed to derived tables, or temporary tables as opposed to table variables or derived tables. And they'll argue and argue and argue about which one's best and why. Then someone will go out and actually do a performance test on them, and the results are usually pretty surprising. So take your best shot at coding it. Then you may want to code it up a little different way using a different construct and check the performance on each. Sometimes, happily, you find that you've chosen the best way. Other times you can see it's starting to get pretty expensive. So with that, that's kind of the lowdown on derived tables. And look for a video entitled Creating a Derived Table. And we'll go out there and build some code and let you see what this looks like. That's ultimately the best way to understand these things.